San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gail F. Baker, Vice President and Provost at the University of San Diego.
And I'm Dr. Noelle Norton, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD.
For the second year in a row, USD, along with its College of Arts and Sciences and Humanities Center, is proud to return as the presenting sponsor for the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books.
As a university deeply committed to the liberal arts, USD promotes a form of lifelong learning that ignites curiosity, builds critical connections across different ideas and topics by seeing them from unique perspectives.
Our partnership with the Festival of Books enables all of us avid readers to come together as a community alongside renowned authors from all over the world and to dive deeply into imaginative stories and important themes.
Yes, books do have the ability to open minds and hearts. On behalf of the University of San Diego, we thank you for joining us for today's program to explore the world of books with us.
Enjoy the presentation.
Buying a home can be really complicated and expensive, with closing costs alone costing thousands of dollars. With SDCCU Zero Closing Costs mortgages, it doesn't have to be. Closing costs include things like title services, appraisal, and more. On an average-priced Southern California home, you could save almost $5,000. With all that money you save, you can decorate your home, work on some DIYs, or take up a new hobby. SDCCU, it's not big bank banking, it's better.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. I'm Joe Yogerst, your host for this panel. And if you attended the book festival last year, then you know me as an author on the travel panel. And if you were at the book festival 2 years ago, you know me from the historical fiction panel. So welcome. We have two amazing authors today. We have Sarah Cribari, who wrote the RV Travel Journal, who's joining us from Arizona. And we have Scott Keyes, who wrote Take More Vacations, and he's joining us from Portland, Oregon. So welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Sure. So let's get right to it. Scott, after reading your book, I was really wondering if the airlines hate you or love you. Hate you because you expose their cheapest seats, or love you because you help get rid of the seats that they haven't sold yet?
Yeah, look, as in most things, I think it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. The funny thing about travel is that the airlines do benefit from our kind of inability to understand and decipher airfare. It's one of the most uniquely torturous things that we buy on a regular basis. And it doesn't behave like anything else. And I mean, how many times have we all thought, gosh, I have no idea what this price is about, if it's going to go up tomorrow, if it's going to go down, should I book now, should I wait, is this airline good or bad, what does this fare include? And that sort of uncertainty really acts as a mental tax that ends up, frankly, robbing a lot of your vacation of the joy that it's supposed to be about, and also inadvertently leading people to overpay for flights. And so one of the things that I really hope to accomplish with this book, Take More Vacations, is to help decipher why airfare behaves the way it does and give people the tools and confidence so that they can book flights, being patient when they're expensive, but acting quickly when they're cheap, so that they are able to take 3 or 4 vacations for the price that they used to pay for one.
So why are airline prices so unpredictable and irrational when they didn't used to be?
So 40 years ago, airfare had a one-size-fits-all model. There really was a single price for what it cost to fly from, let's say, New York to Los Angeles, or Chicago down to Houston. And that price was almost always very expensive. Around the late 1970s, early 1980s, deregulation came into place and made it so that rather than there being a set price for what it cost, the price was now all of a sudden determined by what people were willing to pay. And that really kind of set the airfare into this spiral downward that we've frankly been the beneficiaries of for the past few decades, and especially in the past 5 to 10 years, when we have been living in what I call the golden age of cheap flights. It has never been cheaper to fly as it has in the past 5 or 6 years. And that is true whether you're flying domestically or internationally, whether you're flying in business class or whether you're flying in economy. And that includes whether or not you are, with all the add-on fees or extras that people I think rightly complain about with bags or seat selection. Even accounting for all that, it has never been cheaper to fly as it has today. Nowadays, we are regularly seeing flights from the US to Europe for $300 round trip. Saw a flight the other day from mainland US over to Hawaii for $164 round trip in late summer. Those types of fares were unthinkable even 5 or 10 years ago, and nowadays are the norm. And I think we're going to see them continue to be in place just because of the sort of complex economics that exist that drives airfare to be what it is today.
Okay. And Sarah, at the end of RV Travel Journal, I found myself wondering, as a rookie RVer, whether you're a full hookup person or a dry camping in the wilderness type of traveler.
Well, I am a full hookup person myself. My husband, however, is definitely more of the boondocker dry camping. So when we've gone out in the past, we weren't quite set up for the longer boondocking style. We didn't have a generator or any solar power. So we were sort of restricted to either a few nights or, depending on the weather, couldn't go anywhere too hot. So we tend to go full hookups or at least partial hookups for some of it. However, some of the best spots are when you're boondocking and you're getting out there away from everything. So it depends on your rig and your setup, and it's something that we're looking to do more of in the future, because the little bits we did get to do of dry camping and boondocking we absolutely loved. But for the moment, at least I'm more of a full hookup kind of girl.
Okay, and what is your current rig?
So we are in between rigs at the moment. We just sold a fifth wheel, about a 40-foot Heartland Elkridge. It was fantastic. And we also quickly realized that it is just my husband and I and a dog, and it was a lot of space for just 2 people. So we ended up not being able to get into some of the places that we really wanted to see. A lot of national parks and state parks have restrictions on length. And we kind of discovered that even though it's amazing when you're parked and you have so much space and it's wonderful, it makes driving a little difficult, and it makes kind of getting into places a little harder. So we are currently in the market for a Class C, probably about 28 feet or shorter. I think for our next trip for this fall, that is what we have our eye on at the moment.
Okay. I went RVing for the first time last August in Utah, and I took the whole family, and we had a 28-footer, and I actually found it easier to drive than I expected. I haven't driven anything that long or big before, but having 4 grown-ups in a 28-footer really led to some conflict, I think. So I felt like it wasn't big enough. Mostly between my wife and my 2 daughters who are in their 20s, who just couldn't figure out what space belonged to them and what didn't. So, and I retreated to the back and kept out of it. So Scott, you mentioned this already. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would say it's something to get used to, especially if you're going for the first time from a large house to a small RV or travel trailer. It brings a whole set of problems, but it's part of the fun. And when you get used to it and give everyone a little space, but it also makes you talk to your friends and family. So forceful family time.
Yes. Scott, you mentioned this already, the golden age of cheap flights. I'm wondering if we're having a lull in that because of COVID and airlines trying to recoup the money that they didn't make last year.
Yeah, look, airlines would love nothing more than to recoup all the money that they lost in the last year, but they can't do that for the same reason that McDonald's can't just go and double the price of the McChicken. If they do that, then everybody's just going to walk down the street to Wendy's or stay home and cook dinner for themselves. And airlines, in a similar vein, you know, if American Airlines wants to start charging $1,000 for flights to Hawaii, well, United's just going to come in and start offering $800 flights. And if they do that, then Delta is going to start offering $600 flights, and on down the line. You know, one of the biggest and best determinants of how many cheap flights you see on a route is just how much competition there is between airlines on that route. It's not how far the flight is. It's not, you know, how big the cities are. It's competition between them. And so that's why we see, for instance, not nearly as many cheap flights out of a city like Atlanta as one would expect. And the reason why is because the Delta monopoly there actually precludes there from being as much competition as you would expect for a city that size, and therefore there are fewer cheaper flights available. But the fact that that competition makes it so that you see more and more cheap flights, the real winners in that end up being travelers like you and I, because vacationers, we tend to be very price sensitive. You know, when the price of the trip drops, we're much more likely to book. And when it rises, we're much more likely to skip it or to look elsewhere. And cheap flights alone can drive so many purchasing decisions. Let me give you a quick example. A few weeks ago, you know, we found a great deal and sent it out to Scott's Cheap Flights members for flights from all over the US to Japan for $202 round trip on a 5-star airline, ANA, with availability all the way through March 2022. We got thousands of emails from people who booked this deal. I can tell you 90% of those people who emailed us did not wake up that morning expecting to book a flight to Japan. They probably had no plans whatsoever. But when a $200 flight to Japan pops up, yeah, it doesn't take a whole lot of convincing to say yes to that deal. And that's the beauty of cheap flights. It can really make vacations happen in a way that you may not have been expecting or anticipated.
Yeah. Sarah, do you think that we're now in a golden age of RVing because of COVID? The fact that so many people decided to try it last year or buy one for the first time?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen huge growth in the RV industry. And I mean, even the RV Industry Association recently published numbers on the 2021 travel trends. And you said 56 million Americans plan to go RVing this summer. It's definitely, I think, because of, you know, borders closing and being unable to go on these great vacations that people used to take, you know, going to Europe, going to Asia, you know, that's not possible. So I think a lot of people sort of rediscovered, you know, the great places within America you can go, and RVing was the way, especially during the pandemic. You can go in a safe environment. It's great for social distancing. You know, you're not in public transportation. You can just take your family and you take everything with you. You don't have to worry about, hotels. I know there was for a while worrying about, you know, cleanliness and sanitary and keeping everything clean. And well, hey, if you have an RV, you just take everyone with you. You can bring your own sheets. You can bring your own dishes and kind of stay safe that way. And then also just being able to get back out into nature and exploring, you know, mountains and lakes and all these things that when people are trapped in a city with everything shut down, you don't have the restaurants and you don't have the entertainment that really draws people to cities. I think a lot of people turn towards, you know, the less populated areas and let's go and see the places in the US. And maybe that's not near where they lived. So being able to rent an RV or purchase an RV lets you take your family and go somewhere and really spend time in nature and away from everyone. And I think we're also seeing a renaissance with kind of getting outside and wanting to get more, again, fresh air, more exercise away from cities. And then on top of all of that, the flexibility with work and school. And now you can set up an RV as a mobile office or mobile classroom, and you have more flexibility to be able to drive and work from anywhere as opposed to being in an office every day. So we're seeing a lot of younger generations, millennials and Gen Xers, look at RVs as a mobile home and office, and they can kind of go anywhere and work and hike in the morning and then work in the afternoons and evenings, whereas before that was not really possible.
Yeah, for sure. The flip side of that is that it's become almost impossible to get a camp at a major national park.
Yes,
is what I'm finding.
Yes,
not just in California, but everywhere I've heard. I mean, I had friends, neighbors who just went to Zion National Park and had to stay a long ways from the park in order to, and even up in Alaska, where I was last week, Denali was absolutely packed out, and that's, you know, that's a 6-hour drive from the nearest airport, and that's all domestic tourism still. But national parks, I think it's going to be a record year for a lot of them. So there's a lot. It's the RV industry is booming, but at the same time, it's getting harder to go to familiar places. So, any recommendations on how to get around that?
Well, first of all, make reservations. As you said, it's no longer possible to just show up and find a spot. And national parks have always been kind of hard to do that anyway, but especially now with the increase of people who are RVing, you're having to plan out your trips much farther in advance if you want to park anywhere near there. So reservations, going on more the shoulder seasons or the off seasons, which can be difficult, you know, with school and with work. So that's not always up to people. But absolutely, we're seeing, you know, a lot of the national parks are very, very crowded this year, I think more than anywhere recently. And also parks and free camping in general. There's different places that are becoming overrun, especially with people who are new to RVing. We also see issues with some trash building up and not cleaning up the campsites. So that's something that I think everyone, you know, leave no trace, please, you know, especially if you're new, leaving it better than you found it, just to be able to keep things open for everyone. But on the other hand, I think it's wonderful that so many people are getting out more and being able to do this that you didn't see beforehand. So plan your vacations and look for those shoulder seasons. And there's some great state parks as well if you can't go to the national parks. I think, Joe, you've written about some of the fantastic state parks that are around as well. So as possibly a plan B.
There are a number of state parks that should be national parks, in my opinion. And the states just happened to get there first in the 1880s and 90s and said, the feds are not going to get this. They're not going to get Niagara Falls or the Adirondacks or places like that. So, so Scott, before your $130 fare from New York to Milan, were you much of a traveler?
Yeah, you know, I traveled a bit before that $130 round trip flight to Milan that I got that really kicked off this whole Scott's Cheap Flights saga. But the funny thing was, I was not, you know, many folks look at me today, oh, Scott, you know, you're really the cheap flight whisperer. I was not born a cheap flight expert. I used to make the exact same mistakes that most of us fret about today. I used to constantly fret about overpaying for flights and would see, you know, the price of a flight that I was looking at go up one day, go down the next, and I had felt totally helpless about what to do. And I think it was that sort of coming into this as somebody who lived the same problems that I was trying to solve by demystifying and making cheap flights accessible to people, that hopefully helped remind me that, you know, look, this isn't something that is easy. It's not something that is simple. If it were, nobody would be worrying about or asking, how do you get cheap flights? How can I be able to afford to travel more? And it's that sort of uncertainty and volatility about airfare that the airlines love, because I think it eventually pushes people to a point of nihilism where they just throw up their hands. Oh, whatever it costs, I'll pay it. You know, look, yeah, I really want to go to Paris. I've been dreaming about it for my whole life. Gosh, I mean, flights are $1,200, but it's a long flight. I guess that's worth it. And if they reach that point of nihilism and just assume, oh, flights have to be expensive, then they're more likely to wind up booking expensive flights. And so part of the reason why I'm out here preaching the gospel of cheap flights is to tell folks, look, there's a better way. Like, cheap flights exist, they're real, they're spectacular, and you have to, the first step in order to be able to get them is to remember that, look, they exist. You don't have to book expensive flights. Expensive flights are optional, and that cheap flights don't have to be inconvenient flights. You mentioned that $130 flight to Milan that I got. That was a deal that was not only nonstop, it was on United Airlines, not some airline that nobody's ever heard of. And it included 2 free check bags and free seat selection. Cheap flights can be great flights as well. They don't have to be inconvenient flights, as many folks might assume. Do
you have favorite air carriers that you're willing to mention?
I don't. And the reason why I don't is I try as hard as I can to always stay loyal to my favorite airline, and that's whatever one is cheapest. The reason why I do it, look, I have certain airlines I might not usually want to fly. I usually try to avoid Spirit or Frontier or some of the budget airlines, not because I am biased or because the experience I think is going to be markedly different. I actually think that most airlines, with the introduction of basic economy, basically all airlines are budget airlines now. But the reason why I tend to avoid budget airlines is because if something goes wrong, if the flight gets delayed or canceled, they don't have the same sort of partnerships or the same number of planes flying. And so when a flight gets canceled on Frontier or on Allegiant, it might be days until the next flight that they can put you on to your destination. Whereas if you're on American or Delta or something, it'll likely only be the worst. Like if your flight gets canceled, you'll probably be able to get put on a different one and get there within a few hours of your original time. And so that's why I tend to avoid budget airlines. But I do want to say just briefly, I love budget airlines, even though I don't fly them, because they are largely responsible for that competition that drives down airfare industry-wide. Even if you never fly Spirit or Frontier, you owe them a debt of gratitude for helping force American and Delta and Southwest and the rest to drop their fares lower than they would have in a world where Spirit and Frontier didn't exist.
Yeah. Sarah, how did you first get into RVing?
Well, I kind of got in, well, either dove head first or got in a little backwards, depending on how you're looking at it. I started RVing in about 2017 when my husband had a job offer about 2 hours north of where we were living in Phoenix at the time. And it was a contract offer for about 6 months. And we were trying to figure out, my job was in Phoenix. We had a house. We weren't going to move. And we didn't want to have him commute 2 hours every day. And we were looking at kind of alternative housing. Do we get an apartment? What do we do? Ended up buying a 21-foot travel trailer and parked it in an RV park near where he was going to be working. And he lived up there during the week. I came up on weekends. We took it out camping and exploring the local area and completely fell in love with this RV lifestyle. So fast forward about a year. Yeah, the job ended up being a full-time position that he took. So we ended up selling our house and moving north. And we decided once we got settled to keep the trailer. And now we're kind of weekend warriors, or we just take it out on the weekends to camp and explore, and kind of just continued on RVing. And then a few years after that, we found ourselves with remote jobs, even pre-pandemic, and realized we suddenly had the flexibility to go on longer trips and be able to explore a little bit. So we started looking for, a way we wanted to do a 2 to 3 month trip of the American West in an RV, and ended up doing that last summer. And we've kind of been going ever since.
We may have crossed paths in Utah then.
Yeah, we were there.
Have you ever had an RV trip from hell?
Yes, the last one actually. It's funny because I think there's this great community of RVers, and there's all sorts of YouTubers and Instagrammers, and they're absolutely fantastic, and you see a lot of the good parts of it. But there are definitely some struggles to the RV life as well. We had both truck issues, we had issues with the RV, we had our air conditioning go out, we had our refrigerator go out, and a bunch of different things right in a row too. And so, but I will say it makes you think on your feet. You can't stop. You can't really turn around. We were in the middle of northern Idaho and our refrigerator didn't work. And we were trying to figure out, the closest place to fix it is 3 hours away. And you have to go. You have to keep moving, you can't stop and call up a plumber or an electrician, like you would at home. So you rely on yourself and you learn to fix a lot of stuff yourself, and you come back with great stories.
And Scott, have you ever had a cheap flight from hell?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Well, I guess the best example that I can think of is when I was in my 20s, before, I had a wife and a young daughter and everything, I would go to the ends of the earth for a cheaper flight. And so even if I remember one flight that I took from Washington, D.C. to Denver, and I took the scenic route, which was, instead of a nonstop flight from D.C. to Denver, went D.C. to New York to Boston to Chicago to L.A. out to Denver. Look, taking the scenic route was something I was glad to do in my 20s to save a bit of money. I would never think of it in my 30s and beyond. But I think that's one of those things that is sort of indicative that your preferences and your interest in getting the sort of different types of flights can vary significantly trip to trip, year to year, and being aware of what's available and then being able to make an informed decision and weigh them against, how valuable is your time? Are you time rich and cash poor right now? Or are you cash rich and time poor? And how do you want to balance those is so important. But I wanted to touch on just something briefly that Sarah said. I so love that story about, learning to sort of fix things on the go, and then at the very least getting a great story of it, because that, when I was doing the research for Take More Vacations, was one of the things that I really enjoyed most writing about and getting into, was realizing that we think of travel as something that we only enjoy during the trip itself, when if you look at the research and study on how we enjoy travel, it turns out we actually get more joy in the lead up to a trip and after a trip than we do during the trip itself. And it's not that travel's not a great and wonderful thing, but look, things go wrong sometimes when you're on the road. A refrigerator breaks, the AC unit gives out, a flight that you thought was going to be one stop turns into 6 stops. But after the fact, you get the memories, you get the sort of character building of it, and that funny time when you're on the road in northern Idaho and you had to figure out how to become your own local refrigerator repairman or woman. Those types of things are really one of the most joyous parts of travel, even if they're not necessarily joyous in the moment. And the anticipation, the looking forward to a trip gives us so much joy and happiness. And so don't, downplay that aspect of travel. Don't overlook it. I recommend folks try to book your flights well in advance so you can give yourself something exciting to look forward to today, even if your trip doesn't happen for many months.
I wanted to ask you both, and I'll start with Sarah, how you go about, in Sarah's case, how do you go about finding or researching new places to park your RV when you're on the road?
Well, there are a couple different ways to do it. I would highly recommend researching that before you leave, actually, especially with how many people are on the road right now. But there are some fantastic apps out there that both are RV GPS centric, because especially with an RV, you can't always rely on Google Maps. The time's going to be longer that you drive. They're not made for the height and the weight of RVs. So you might end up on roads with low overpasses or like low hanging power lines, which is a disaster, or weight restrictions on roads. So there are different apps. There's RV Trip Wizard is both a website and an app where you can actually plug in where you want to go, and it gives you different locations for where you can camp. All Stays is a great app. Campendium. There are many, many out there. And they're all fantastic. Some are paid, some are free, but they can give you everywhere from, a free Walmart parking lot to campgrounds to really nice RV parks. They kind of run the gamut on where you can stay. And then there's also places like boondocking, like Boondockers Welcome, if you're just looking to really, do it on the cheap and not stay at an RV park. There are all sorts of places that you can do that will show you where it's safe and where it's easily, able to park an RV overnight or for longer stays.
And Scott, I know that you mentioned several of your favorite ways in the book, but maybe you'd like to say what some of your favorite research tools are for finding cheap flights.
Absolutely. The ways that I tend to try to keep track of where I might be interested in, it's an ongoing process every single day where basically my hub is Google Maps. And the way I do it is Google Maps has a function where any given location, any given destination, any given, little street or cafe, you can click saved. And so I just have a list of travel ideas where I'll click and save something. I see a great photo on some Atlantic photo set, and I'll say, oh, wow, I'd love to go up to Svalbard. And so click on Svalbard, save it, and maybe have a link to that article. I'll be reading a book, Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler, and be like, oh man, going to Berlin sounds amazing. Let me go, find Berlin, find this little cafe, save it on my Google Maps. And that way, when a cheap flight pops up somewhere, that cheap flight to Berlin pops up, that cheap flight to Northern Norway pops up, wherever, I can go to my Google Maps and see, are there places around here that I'd be interested in going? Or have I found anything interesting? And then sort of make my decision. Is this a place I want to visit? Is this somewhere I'm interested in? Or is this somewhere that, maybe I'll take a pass on?
Okay. We're almost out of time. And I wanted to thank both of you for joining us on the travel panel for the San Diego Union 2021 Festival of Books. Sarah Cribari of the RV Travel Journal and Scott Keyes of Take More Vacations. Thanks for being with us today. I'm Joe Yogerst, the host of the travel panel. You can purchase both of their books from our indie bookseller partners at bookshop.org/shop/SDFOB. Also, please consider supporting the San Diego Council of Literacy by visiting literacysandiego.org. You can continue to join us for the full program of author panels, exciting demonstrations, and live entertainment streaming entirely online. All videos will be available at sdfestivalofbooks.com. And once again, we are Sarah Cribari, Scott Keyes, and Joe Yogerst, and we're joining you from the travel panel at the 2021 San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. Thanks to both of you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, everybody. Great chatting.
Hello, I'm Jose Cruz. I'm the CEO for the San Diego Council on Literacy. We work with a network of 29 youth, adult, and family literacy programs that annually serve 160,000 residents of all ages at no cost. Our mission is to unite the community to support literacy. It's an exciting year for us. It's our 35th anniversary. It's also the 5th anniversary of the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. The San Diego Council on Literacy is a beneficiary of this event. So when you participate, you support literacy, especially through the author panels and just in general. So when you participate in this event, you also make it possible for another person, a child or an adult, to improve their reading and writing skills so they can read the books that you read. We have our favorite event activities. We like the Storytime Hour, and you probably have your favorites too. So we hope that you'll join us at the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books and learn more too about the work of the San Diego Council on Literacy by going to literacysandiego.org. Thank you.